Hi everyone, just wanted to hop back on here and do the video I promised on the screening and intake process and what that looks like for me. Caveat to all of this is that I work in private practice, which means that I have a lot more freedom in what I can do in that process. In community mental health and addiction agencies, there are usually a lot more hoops that you have to jump through as far as policies and procedures that you have to complete in order to screen and then intake the person. That looks probably a little bit more structured than what I do. However, most of what I do is sort of a condensed version of what I've learned while working in a community mental health agency. So though it's condensed and it's probably a quicker turnaround time than what something in the community mental health agency would look like, it still follows the same sort of parameters. So I will just get started here. My screening process actually takes place over the phone. So screening is just the process to determine eligibility. The criteria that you would have to meet in order to be a client here at my agency is, number one, to be a woman. I only see women. So obviously if a man calls my agency, I would refer him to someone who is going to better suit his needs as a man. So if a woman calls and she wants to schedule an appointment with me, then I go down a small list of questions that I ask. One being her name, obviously just demographic information, name, age, those sorts of things. Sometimes people find me from all over the state of Ohio, and so I need to know their location in order to offer them the best services. I do offer telehealth services as far as one of the services that I do. So I ask location and ask if they live in Cleveland, for example, if they're willing to do some remote counseling, because obviously driving to my office in West Central Ohio is going to be out of the question for them. Hopefully, I wouldn't want them to drive that far just to see me. So that's one of the questions I'll ask. Another thing that I try to sort of weed out of my practice is any kind of court involvement. I'm not really into testifying or getting involved in big elaborate court cases. I don't like to do court-ordered counseling because I feel like it restricts what I am wanting or feel is necessary to do because of those restrictions. So if a client were to present with some sort of court order, I would probably refer them to another person. I also want to get an idea of their presenting concerns. Just give me a quick rundown of why you're scheduling counseling today. And usually that's a couple minute answer and we move on. Obviously I'm ruling out some things there if they answer and they tell me that they for example, are a sex offender and they need sex offender guided treatment. I obviously would have to refer that out because I don't specialize in that area. So I'm looking for things that are outside of my scope of practice when I ask that question. If they are outside of my scope of practice, then I refer them to another agency. And I do just keep kind of a running list of places I know of that will treat those specific conditions. You make a lot of connections through going to school, through continuing into graduate school, your internships, where you live, etc. So I have a decent list of referrals that I'm able to give depending on what that client specific need is. So we schedule the first appointment. They come in. What I do in the meantime, after the appointment is scheduled, is I get their email address and I send them all of my intake paperwork via email in an online client portal. So they're able to read through all of my intake, my policies and procedures, cancellation policies, etc., etc. They're able to read that through on their own time and complete it on their own time, just any time between now and the time that our first appointment is assigned. So that gives them some time to just kind of digest all of it, and some time to complete the paperwork I'm asking them to complete, even though it's really not that lengthy at all. It's not near as what they would have to do in a community mental health agency. It's a short demographic form, some credit card information, their insurance information, and that's about it. And then they need to electronically sign all of the documents that I send them to review. So that's sort of the interim part of the intake process that I do, not face-to-face. And then we have our first appointment. That first appointment is meant for the diagnostic assessment. I'm going to be asking a ton of questions just to get to know that client. I do, at the beginning of the client, go over something called informed consent, and that is essentially just a rundown of the client's rights and responsibilities as a client. One of the things that I make sure to address in every single first-time appointment is their confidentiality rights, and in at what times I would have to break their confidentiality. I explain the mandated reporter responsibilities. I explain suicidal and homicidal ideation, and any other times that I would have to report what they're saying to me. I ask if they have any questions about that, and I kind of go over just some of my practice procedures, what the cancellation policy is, what the cancellation fee is if they were to no-show or late cancel me, my hours of operation, how they can be in touch with me, all of those sorts of things we go over at the start of that first appointment. Then we head into the diagnostic assessment. As you can imagine, that is to render a diagnosis by the end of that session. Now, in private practice, I get a little bit more time to do that with. I can take up to 3 sessions to come to a diagnosis. So if I can't reach the diagnosis at that point, I don't have to, especially if the client is self-pay. A lot of what we are doing in this world is kind of dictated by insurance, and so if the client is a self-pay client, you can really move at your own pace. If it's an insurance claim, then you kind of got to do what the insurance is asking you to do in order to be reimbursed for that time. But the diagnosis, the assessment includes just gathering a lot of information regarding the presenting problems. You're going to want to know the signs and symptoms, the history of the problem, so how long it's been going on. Sometimes they'll say a lifetime, sometimes they'll say it just started 6 months ago when I had a car accident, etc. You want to know the frequency, the duration, the severity of the symptoms, and any patterns the symptoms had. Sometimes you will notice that it follows a very structured pattern almost, where you can almost predict the next thing that's going to happen in the person's life. That's important to pick up on. You'll want to ask if there was any time where the symptoms got worse. Recently a client of mine came in and said, I've always had anxiety issues. However, they really, really got bad when I got into a car accident with my son 2 months ago. So we were able to determine what exactly she was experiencing now. You want to know about their family history of mental illness and addiction issues. That's really important to know. You want to know about their relationships with other people. Who's significant in their life? What do those relationships look like? You want to know about their legal history, their educational history, their developmental history, and also any physical health components. All of that information gives you a really well-rounded picture into what this person's diagnosis would be. Obviously, with addiction and tailored to addiction, you're going to want to know their usage history. What was the first drug that they used? How frequently were they using when they began versus how frequently they use now? And what was the escalation in use in substances? So, example, they started with cigarettes, and then they moved to alcohol, and then they moved to marijuana, and then from marijuana it escalated into what? You're going to want to know those things, and then how often they're using those substances. All of that is really important information in order to reach an accurate diagnosis. And those things can be tricky. I think I've commented on some of your discussions already about how tricky addiction diagnoses can be, because sometimes the client is still in denial. They don't want to acknowledge that they have a problem with the substance. They also are, there's some shame involved in, if they're using daily, maybe several times a day, there's some shame involved in reporting the accurate use of the substance. So sometimes they'll minimize that. And so it's really important to kind of pay attention to nonverbal language as well. And if you see, the tensing of their body and they're getting all nervous and they're getting fidgety when they're answering certain questions, that kind of clues you in to that maybe they're not being as truthful as they should be. And a lot of the times that has nothing to do with wanting to get out of getting in trouble. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it's more a shame component, and that they're embarrassed by their use and they don't like to admit that it's gotten as bad as it's gotten. So those are all things to just keep in mind. That's all I have. I'm trying to make this video as short as I can. I apologize, it's been a little long, but I wanted to give you an idea of kind of what I do as far as my process. And again, just keep in mind that everybody's process is a little different, and obviously mine is going to look a bit different because I'm in private practice. But a lot of what I learned was from the community mental health basis, and those skills I kind of just adapted to a shorter, condensed version in private practice. If you have any questions about any of that, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email, and I'll look forward to talking with you guys. Have a good rest of your week.